Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. And the first question I have right off the bat today, I was thinking about it, and it's right before I cracked the mic here. I was thinking about balsa wood airplanes. And the question that I posed to you, the listener, are what were some of your favorite cheap toys growing up? And by growing up, I mean you might be a 45-year-old man or woman right now. And when you see these things at the supermarket, if they still sell some of them, because some of them they don't sell anymore for reasons, it can't be trusted not to choke on them and other whatnots of the nanny state. I don't mean to take it so tinfoil hat, but okay, so remember those little parachute people? It was a little plastic weight basically attached to 3 or 4 strings to a little thin piece of plastic, and they were little parachute guys, like little army parachute guys. They were tiny, the little plastic pieces. I understand kids can swallow them and choke on them. I get it 100%. There was probably 2 pennies worth of material all together in those toys, and they sold them for, I don't know, $1 back in the 80s and through the 90s, and probably way before that, $1.50 even. You used to go to the arcade and win tickets, and it was one of the cheapest things you could get with tickets. And I was always a very happy boy, even if I didn't win that many tickets that particular day, because I could always afford to spend 5 or 10 tickets, whatever, on one of those little parachute guys. And I would have so much fun for days with those things. Well, days at most, because they would always wind up getting destroyed or caught in a tree or caught somewhere, or I would tinker with them in some sort of manner that wasn't what they were designed for, and they wouldn't last that long. But I got a lot of mileage, all things considered, a lot of enjoyment out of those little cheap plastic parachute guys. So what were your favorite cheap toys growing up? And I don't mean that as a subjective, well, I grew up in a very affluent family and my favorite cheap toy was my Tyco RC car or whatever. No, those things cost like $50, $60, $70, $100 or more. And maybe that in your family that wasn't a lot of money. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking really cheap stuff. The things that you could get for $1 at the supermarket or the gas station or wherever. One of my favorite toys, and I'm going to just give these ideas here. I'm going to talk about what my favorite toys were because maybe it would make you remember, oh yeah, I remember that. And then it might spark a little memory of your own, or maybe you want to share it with me. GeekTherapyRadio.com, of course. It's easier than ever to reach out to me through there, or Twitter, Geek Therapy Radio on Twitter, Facebook also. One of my favorite toys were those little balsa wood airplanes that came in a little thin flat packaging, plastic packaging, and you had to carefully slide the wings into the little slots in the balsa wood. And it was always kind of I always had fun with them either way, no matter the quality of what I got. But sometimes it was a crapshoot. Either you were going to get a plane that no matter what you tried, always pulled to the left or the right, or always dove, or always pitch up way too much. I know you could slide the wings back and forth and you could try to get it just right, but sometimes you just couldn't. It wasn't perfect. Maybe sometimes half of the wing would be warped and there was really nothing you could do about it. Maybe you could steam it with an iron or flatten it out, whatever. The quality kind of varied. Overall, there was always pretty good, and they were really cheap, and I had so much fun with them. And really, those are the kind of toys that stick out the most in our memories, don't they? My wife had American Girl dolls. Is that right? American Girl dolls? They weren't cheap necessarily. She was telling me the story about how for a couple Christmases she would have to, for a few Christmases she would have to, her parents or family would say, okay, you can pick out one accessory for your American Girl doll and maybe we'll get you that one accessory. But everyone had their little thing. But it's the really cheap toys that we remember. What are some other really cheap toys that are coming to mind? My favorite, like I said, by far, I think were balsa wood airplanes. I think a close second for me would be the foam airplanes. And God help you if you were able to get more than 2 hours of use out of those big foam airplanes. But they were so cool, weren't they? Man, as I'm talking about this, it just brings back the flood of memories. One of my most fond memories with those styrofoam airplanes was a Christmas morning that my cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents came to visit when we lived in Kingwood. When we first moved there, early 90s, I was just a little boy. My grandfather got us one of those styrofoam airplanes, and I still remember to this day, and it's documented. It's on film, well, high 8 videotape. We went out to the cul-de-sac to play with the styrofoam airplane, and my grandfather, who's long since passed away, well, he passed away several years ago, teaching us how to fly it, teaching us how to throw it. You don't just throw it with the nose pitching up in the air. You kind of gently throw it with the nose down a little bit, usually, so that it would pick up lift and you get most of the glide path through it. And it's just a very fond memory of going out to the street with my grandfather and playing with that styrofoam airplane. And not even that Christmas, even more than just that Christmas, my dad would come out and play with that styrofoam. Not the same one, obviously. I think any normal childhood, you probably went through at least a dozen of those styrofoam airplanes. But my dad would come out and play with it too. It made all boys young again. It's something about flying things just captures the imagination of boys, at least. And I guess, of course, girls too. But all my brothers and my dad and even grandfather, the flying things is what really captured our imagination and made boys of all ages young again. One of my favorite things to do with those styrofoam airplanes, and to a lesser extent with the balsa wood airplanes, those little tiny balsa wood airplanes, was with the styrofoam airplanes, I had an erector set, and which I don't see anymore, the metal erector sets. But erector sets came with motors and gears, and I would fashion a propeller out of something. Maybe I would take a propeller off of one of the bigger balsa wood airplanes. Remember with the rubber bands that you wind up and let go? Oh my gosh. I'm about to go over to eBay or Amazon right now and just buy a bunch of balsa wood airplanes. But I would take the big propeller off those bigger balsa wood rubber band power airplanes, and I would put the propeller onto a motor from my erector set, or a motor that I went and bought from Radio Shack for 50 cents, and try to somehow, I would cut grooves into the styrofoam very carefully and try to seat the motor inside the styrofoam and adhere the propeller to the drive shaft of the electric motor in some way. I was never extremely successful with it. It was never balanced correctly. Let's just say my handiwork as a 10-year-old was not, I wouldn't be working for SpaceX, that's for sure. But it was fun to even tinker and try, and you get the propeller running even though it wasn't balanced great, and I basically just had the red and black positive and negative leads running off of the electric motor to a couple of AA batteries taped together end to end, and just see what I could do. I had no concept of CG, of the center of gravity and where it should be in relation to the airplane, the wings of an airplane. I didn't know that putting a bunch of batteries in an electric motor in the nose of the airplane would cause it to be so nose heavy. There was no hope of flying. I had no idea of ballast, and maybe if I put all that heavy stuff in the front, maybe I would have to weigh down the rear a little bit to balance the center of gravity a bit more. I didn't know about any of that when I was a little boy, but that's how I learned about those things. That's how those concepts were ingrained in my brain, so that when I grew up and I started to conceptualize and learn about these things, oh yeah, I remember that when I was 9 or 10 years old. That's why my airplane would always nosedive into the ground. That's why it never would pitch up or do whatever I wanted to do. Never flew very long, and it only lasted 1 or 2 tosses before you'd inevitably throw it. And I wasn't using very strong tape. I don't think any of us were. It wasn't like I was using duct tape or anything like that. It was just Scotch tape off my mom's desk and just taping down the batteries in the electric motor and taping like the wire connections to the batteries. And it's just going, it's just running. The only way you stop it is you put your finger in the propeller and try to stop it, or dip it into the grass to make it stop, and then you grab the propeller. All that fun tinkering. And I always wished when I was young, when I was that age, tinkering with these things, with the balsa wood airplanes, I would try to fit as small an electric motor as I could to the big balsa wood airplanes with the rubber band propellers. I would get rid of the rubber band and that whole mechanism, and I would try to find an electric motor at Radio Shack with a small enough drive shaft to put through the plastic propeller, and then try to affix that to the balsa wood frame somehow. And for a few of my attempts were pretty great. I vividly remember one time getting it decently correct, and the motor was small enough but powerful enough, and I think I was using a 9-volt battery, if memory serves, and I don't think it was a 9-volt motor. I think it was a 1.5-volt motor, possibly a 3-volt motor that I was putting 9 volts into. So it was running way fast. It was overspeed. It was running at overspeed. And that little sucker, at least one time that I vividly remember, out in the cul-de-sac with my balsa wood airplane that I converted to an electric airplane. I forget, the 9-volt battery. I swear it got an inch or two off the ground. It built up enough speed. Actually, no, it wasn't an inch. It got like a foot or two off the ground. It just shot straight up and then straight down and disintegrated. But I got off the ground, and despite the airplane disintegrating, I think what pulled it into the air wasn't anything aerodynamic. It was just that the propeller was spinning so fast. It was like a helicopter just pulled it up into the air. It had nothing to do with any lift going over the wings. It just brute forced it into the air, but then it crashed down, and I wasn't sad about that or angry about that. I was like, it flew for a second. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I actually make something that quote unquote worked. Now, post-analysis would reveal that it didn't really work. There were a number of things wrong with this prototype. As I mentioned before, it basically brute forced itself into the air with lift from the propeller. The propeller may have come detached slightly with the tape and angled up in a way that just kind of pulled the nose up. But I was happy that this little thing that I built actually worked. It actually functioned and worked. And the whole setup must have cost less than $5. Remember those little electric motors at Radio Shack? Man, I miss Radio Shack. I miss having a shop in the neighborhood that catered to hobbyists. And I know you're saying, well, what about a hobby shop? Yes, I know, but that's not in every neighborhood. Radio Shack was a franchise, so it was literally in every neighborhood or very close to you, closer to a mom and pop hobby shop. Hobby shops would always be preferred, of course, but Radio Shack, at least where I lived, was usually closer. And it was, I so miss going in there and pulling those drawers open of components and looking at the capacitors and the resistors and the diodes and the LEDs and the battery harnesses and breadboards and battery and voltage testers and the drawers of motors, and buying like the 18-volt motors, the big daddy motors, and trying to get those to run and all the force that they could get out of them. But they were really cheap. You could buy them really cheap. I guess for me, that's a toy that I used to buy often that were very cheap. And going down this rabbit trail, I'm just constantly reminded of all these different things that I did with these cheap toys. In this specific case, those electric motors that you'd buy for Radio Shack for like $1 or $2. I figured out one day, and I know that this is just rudimentary and this is just kind of basic stuff now. But I remember that I figured out, well, what if I had this little electric motor. It cost, I don't know, $1.50, like I mentioned, a little 1 volt or 3 volt motor. And I said, what if I just took these speaker connections, the positive and negative speaker connection, out of the back of a speaker. So it's the speaker's being powered off of, the home theater amplifier. What if I just took it out of the back of the speaker and put those the positive and negative leads on the electric motor? What would happen? And played music through it. And lo and behold, sound came out of it. It was it wasn't a speaker. It was very tinny sound, but you could tell that is MC Hammer playing. That is the soundtrack to the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles playing right there. Turtle power, Turtle power. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Early 90s rap. Anyways, there was music coming out of this electric motor. And I held the motor in my hand and I could feel the vibrations and especially the bass, the low frequencies shaking my hands. It was incredible. And then this eureka moment, that was one of the coolest experiences in my life up to that point, was taking that electric motor, and this is going to sound really shady, but biting it gently between my teeth. And then all of a sudden, my skull was filled with the music and the bass of MC Hammer or whatever I was listening to through the stereo. Absolutely filled. It was bone conduction. The vibrations of the music were going through the electric motor into my teeth, into my jaw, into my skull. And the music was just like, it was in your brain, man. It sounded like it was in your brain. And the power of the bass, like pumping like in your jaw. It was remarkable. And the experimentation that went on from there, I took the motor out of my mouth. I didn't hold the motor like closed-lipped in my mouth like I was about to swallow it, just in my teeth. Take the motor out and press it firmly against my forehead and get a very similar effect. Oh my gosh, I hear the music in my brain. Taking the motor and then pushing it firmly against the drywall and having it resonate quite loudly through the actual wall itself, and then putting it on the door frame on the wooden stud, and then going to the window and pushing it up against the window and finding and searching and exploring and discovering what surfaces resonated the most. And I was so thrilled by my findings. The discovery, like the synapses connecting in my brain, the circuits being formed in my brain through these discoveries and through this exploration, I thought, wow, it sounds like this through this material. I'm going to go downstairs in the kitchen and get the biggest metal mixing pot or whatever that my mom has, metal salad bowl, and put the electric motor against that, and it just boomed out of there. It just blasted. It wasn't super high fidelity sound. It sounded like what you would expect, except it was really loud. It resonated perfectly through that gigantic, I guess it was probably 14 or 15 inch, just pure steel bowl. It was absolutely incredible. And I remember being so psyched up about it that I called my friends over. I called John Robertson. I said, John, come over. I just discovered a new element of the universe. I was like, John, look, check this out. And I remember him thinking that was really cool, but not being as enthused as I was about it. He was obsessed with video games. All he wanted to do was play Final Fantasy for Super Nintendo. I've said once or twice, maybe on Geek Therapy Radio, that I love Final Fantasy now. I put many hours into different Final Fantasy games as an adult. But as a kid, I hated Final Fantasy. Growing up, my childhood, I despised role-playing games. I absolutely hated them. I know this is crazy. A lot of you out there are thinking, I love Final Fantasy. I love Secret of Mana. I loved all that. I loved, Earthbound, which is, it's an RPG. I loved, Breath of Fire. Is that it? Phantasy Star and on Sega, all those RPGs. But I hated them. I hated them because I think I was too fidgety as a kid. I always wanted to do something with my hands and outside, and I just thought that RPGs and Final Fantasy in particular, because it was arguably one of the most popular RPGs at the time, was so boring. I didn't want to go to my friend's house and sit there and just watch him play Final Fantasy the whole time. It's like, John, can we please play with your Ninja Turtles sewer? What was that vehicle that they had that shot pizzas out of it? Anybody remember that? It was battery powered. It was their sewer. It was like a tank that the Ninja Turtles had in the original cartoon that rode through the sewers, and they made a toy of it. I used to collect Ninja Turtles action figures just religiously. Every time we went to the convenience store, I would have to get a Ninja Turtles action figure or an accessory for it. But my friend John Robertson had the pizza shooter, had that vehicle that you rolled around and it shot discs of pizza out of it across the room. And that was, oh my gosh, it was the coolest thing in the world. They also had the Technodrome. Was that what it was called? Gosh, I'm blanking out. It's been so long. But what Shredder lived in all the other bad guys of the show lived in this big giant sphere. I think it was called Technodrome. I think it was. I don't feel like looking it up right now. But he had that, and it was kind of like if you had the Death Star action set from Star Wars, but I wasn't as into Star Wars as I was into Ninja Turtles. And this thing was really cool and all. The Technodrome, whatever it was called. But by far the coolest toy that ever came out for Ninja Turtles ever in the history of Ninja Turtles ever was that pizza shooter that shot those little plastic discs. Like, John, I don't want to watch you play Final Fantasy. Can we go outside and ride bikes or play with the Ninja Turtles and the pizza shooter? I can't. I don't want to sit here on the bed or on the floor while you run around in Final Fantasy and the same music just repeats over and over and over. But now I get it. I completely get why he was so enthralled in the game. It was an escape. You could imagine that you were these heroes saving the world. I completely get it. And the games are great. I love Final Fantasy games now. I am never more than, a foot away from playing Final Fantasy. I got it right here on my phone and all the emulators. I love Final Fantasy, but I didn't back then. I wanted to go play outside. Where was I going with that? I said that, John, let's go ride bikes. John, he didn't learn how to ride a bike. He didn't know how to ride a bike then until we were, I would say, in probably 5th grade, 11 or 12 years old, which is really late to be learning to ride a bike. He had a good excuse, though. It wasn't just that he was, super uncoordinated or anything like that. He grew up in San Francisco, or at least in California. I believe he grew up in San Francisco and was very hilly where he was. And there was no place in his house where he grew up in those formative years where he could safely learn how to ride a bike. So he never learned. By the time he got to Pan Flat, Houston, he hadn't learned to ride a bike. So I taught him how to ride a bike. And I felt very proud of that. We were both older kids. And I just told him, don't be embarrassed about what anybody else thinks. Because at that time, if you didn't know how to ride a bike, you were made fun of a lot. It was like being 17 years old or 18 years old and not having a car. If you didn't know how to ride a bike, then you weren't anything and you were made fun of a lot. So I taught John how to ride a bike. Took a couple days, but I was so proud of him. I was so happy because now we could ride bikes. Now we could actually get out in the neighborhood and ride bikes. There's this one time that we were playing video games. We were playing Super Nintendo at his house because I like playing other video games. It wasn't that I was anti-playing video games with him. It's just I didn't want to. Final Fantasy was a one-player game. What was I going to do? I couldn't do anything to help out in the game. Usually it was a one-player game. So I wasn't opposed to playing Super Nintendo. When we would play Street Fighter and Mario and other games. His mom, I don't remember if she was mad at us or just concerned, but like every parent of the early 90s and late 80s did, that's going to rot your brain, go play outside. We got the brilliant idea that, hey, we can just kill two birds with one stone. What if we played Super Nintendo outside? It was such a foreign concept. This was 1993, 1994. The only video games you could play outside was on your Game Boy. And in fact, playing Game Boy outside was pretty good because you had a consistent source of light, the sun. Whether it was cloudy or sunny, you had good light on the screen. So the only video games you could play outside was the Game Boy. Not even the Game Gear could be played outside, or the Atari Lynx. They had backlit screens that got too washed out and you couldn't see them in direct sunlight. Game Boy was perfect in direct sunlight. But the idea of playing Super Nintendo outside was absolutely unheard of. Playing a console video game outside, completely unheard of, because you got to think what was required to do that. You need to bring the entire TV and the Super Nintendo outside. And dang it, that's exactly what we friggin' did. He had this small, like 13-inch TV VCR combo thing in his room. And we just unplugged it, and we took it out, and we set it on top of the air conditioner, the compressor, outside his house. I don't know if it's the compressor. Is that the compressor that's outside that blows all the hot air out? That might be the compressor, evaporator, whatever. It's the thing outside your house that blows all the hot air out of the top, heat exchanger, something like that. And it doesn't matter. We set the Super Nintendo and the TV on top of the air conditioning unit outside, and we had some folding lawn chairs, and we sat outside, and the kids were riding by on their bikes, just like, what? Holy crap. It's like we figured it out. Everybody's parents, they were all riding their bikes because their parents told them, stop playing Nintendo and go outside. And we figured out, me and John Robertson, how to do both. It was amazing. We were the Einsteins. It was like a ray of sunshine had cracked through the clouds and was only shining on us at that moment. We had figured out what every kid had struggled for centuries how to figure out. When your parents had to tell you to stop doing what you like doing inside and go outside, we figured out how to do what we like doing inside, outside. We were brilliant little geniuses. We were the envy of the neighborhood. Kids would stop their bikes, throw them in the lawn, and just watch us playing Street Fighter or Super Mario World. It blew their minds, and it blew our minds. We had thought we had stumbled onto the secret of life. The secret of life was to bring a small TV outside and hook your Nintendo to it. It was brilliant, and we were brilliant for doing so. What a glorious time to be alive. I want to talk about a couple other little cheap toys that defined our childhoods. One of those things for me were those hand helicopters. Handcopters, those things where they would spin. It was just a propeller on a stick. It was literally just a propeller on a stick. And you would push with your hands. You would drag your palms across each other in different directions to spin that propeller, and it would go shooting up into the sky. And the coolest thing to me wasn't necessarily seeing how hard I could push it and seeing how far up in the sky I could get it to go. I wanted it to go as high as possible because I liked what it did on the way down better than I liked what it did on the way up. On the way down, it would catch and spin the opposite direction and float down very slowly, almost like there was a parachute attached to it. And I didn't know the aerodynamics and the physics involved with what was happening, but I remember being way more fascinated by the fact that it fell slowly versus going up very fast. I thought in my little brain that it would just fall out of the sky like a rock. Nope, it goes up and then it falls for a few feet, and then it catches the wind again and rotates like almost faster than when it went up, and it comes down very slowly and gently. And that always blew my mind. That was so cool. One of the things I would try to figure out with those propellers, I would try to attach an electric motor to everything. So I would take the same Radio Shack motor and try to get put enough tape around the drive shaft to make the hand helicopter fits just snugly enough onto the rotor or the drive shaft, and then turn it on with a 9-volt battery, spin it really fast, and then kind of use my fingernail to flick up, get it off the tape real quick, and then see how far I could get it to shoot in the sky that way. I was always attaching motors and batteries to things that didn't need motors and batteries. So those hand helicopters. The last thing I'll say, because this is we're getting up to about 30 minutes here, is something that actually Actually, I've ordered it again. I forgot that I ordered it at 2 a.m. the other night. It's cheap. As far as cheap toys are concerned, it was probably more expensive. These days, it's $12. I purchased this thing for $12, and that thing it's called different other names, but if you type in Gyrokite into Google, does anybody remember Gyrokites? I don't mean these really fancy kites with streamers coming off of them that had the disc on top that kind of slowly rotate and kind of barely look like a helicopter. No, this was a kite, if you can call it a kite, that operated on the gyro effect, just like a gyrocopter. Remember when I said the hand helicopters, I was more fascinated in the way that it would come down the earth slowly through auto gyro and through auto rotation? There was a kite that was specifically designed for this. It was all plastic and metal. And it had these blades on it, rotors, hard plastic, hard, heavy plastic that were about 2 feet in full diameter. And what the idea is that you find the direction of the wind, and you need a steady, brisk wind in one direction. So it worked great at the beach, like 10 knots at least, I think it says. And you'd face it into the wind, and you'd just twist the propeller or twist the rotors yourself to get it started. And the wind would accelerate the rotors, and after not too long of a time, it would start to generate its own lift. It would catch the wind and generate its own lift, and it was tethered with a string so that you could guide it up into the air, and it sounded like a helicopter, and those 2-foot diameter rotors were spinning around so fast they would literally cause serious injury to your fingers. And that's probably why they don't sell them really on shelves anymore at Kroger, but you can still order them online. Probably one of my all-time favorite toys. This is going to be the third gyrocopter that I've ever bought. Really what happens is they just get lost in the shuffle, or I warp them. I'll leave them in the car and the plastic gets warped too much, because this is all based on balance. If those rotors get warped too much, and it's out of balance. And they're cheap. $12, ordered a new one. Now I can keep it safe and sound in my house. One of my favorite toys of all time. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to include a link in the podcast description about where you can get these things. And if there's a little tick up in sales, my show's not that big, but if the person who sells these things notices, hey, 2 or 3 more people bought this thing. You know what I should do? I should add it to the merch of my website. Maybe I'll figure out a way to do that, but I'll put a link into the description to where I bought this thing. It's shady. It looks like a website that was designed in 1998. The process is all done through PayPal, and it's safe as anything else. But yeah, the actual product came out probably 25 or 30 years ago. That's about as old as the website looks. The first time I bought it was in the mall. I saw it in the mall in some shop. And it blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. The only way you can get it now is on a website, because it's so. Once you see this thing, you'll understand exactly why it's not sold in stores to children. I had it as a child, and I drew blood on myself plenty by not respecting the physics of the rotating 2-foot wide, fairly heavy plastic blades, and they chopped into my fingers good, not just little cuts like you'd get from a drone or something like that. But these were big, heavy blades flying through the air, deep cuts, like to the bone, chomps, the kind of cuts that don't bleed immediately. And you're just looking at that flap of skin, and then all of a sudden the blood gushes out of it. That type of deep cut. So yeah, I don't understand why they don't sell it to kids anymore. And the way I got these deep cuts, because I could never just leave well enough alone, I could never use anything the way it was intended to be used, is I took that kite more than once, and I would try to ride my bike as fast as I can, and I put a speedometer on my bike, which is a bad idea for a child. To see how fast you could get your bike. I wonder if I can get my bike fast as my mom's car. I wonder if I can brake 30 miles an hour on this hill. Oh, you could, and it wasn't advised. Anyways, I would have my Gyrokite behind me, trying to get it just right, dangling it behind me, and get enough speed on my bike where I could ride around and pull the kite behind me. It worked slightly. It was never effective, and it usually just wound up with me getting hit on my fingers or my arms with one of those big rotating swords that were spinning around. And it sounds like a helicopter. What it is a gyrocopter. Technically, it's a gyrocopter or an auto gyro, whatever you want to call it. But the blades rotating, it sounds exactly like a helicopter. Even when you're at the beach and it's 100 feet up in the air, you can hear it thumping the air. There's serious inertia happening up there. There's serious momentum in those blades chopping through the air, and you can hear it 100 feet down on the beach over the waves. It is the coolest thing in the world. I freaking love that thing. So that's going to do it for the podcast today. I just wanted to go down memory lane. What are some of your favorite cheap toys from your childhood? And I couldn't get to. There's thousands of them. No doubt that there's thousands of them. Let me know. Email me or go to the website geektherapyradio.com or tell me on Twitter, Geek Therapy Radio on Twitter, all those good things. I'm dying to hear what your favorite cheap toys were as a kid, especially if you didn't grow up in the United States. Especially if you didn't grow up in the United States. If you grew up in the Middle East or South America or Asia or Europe, England, anywhere in the world, India, Australia, I would love to know what you guys had growing up. Cheap toys. Remember, cheap toys. I'm talking things that you saw at the grocery store that you could get real quick or that only cost a few tickets at the arcade. Little cheap things. Remember those little rubber poppers? They were like half spheres, and you would push them inside out and put them on a desk, and they would go, and they would pop up into the air. Those little things, party favors. Man, let me know what your favorite cheap toys growing up were. Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. You are worthy of love, both giving and receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-confidence. I implore you, especially in this day and age, to find a hobby, relive old hobbies, even if that means cruising along eBay and looking up those old cheap toys that you remember from your childhood, and just escape there for a few minutes. What is the saying I saw recently? Joy, a form of resistance is joy. Like if you don't let the world beat you down, if you can still find joy around you and take joy in things, then you're not beaten. Then you're winning. You're winning the fight if you can still find joy. That a form of protest is finding joy in your life. So if you can find a little bit of joy in your life by embracing a new geek thing, an old geek thing, if you have the ability to build a new computer sometime in the near future, embrace that, enjoy that. If you feel so inclined to ride your bike, to grease up your bike again, squirt it down with some WD-40 and go out and ride a bike again. Pump up the tires, get new tires for it. Enjoy that. If you have the ability to fly a kite, enjoy that. Just enjoy something, enjoy a hobby, and enjoy your geek thing, and invest yourself in it, and just take pride in what you're doing and enjoy what you're doing. Thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. Be on the lookout for the podcast or the broadcast that will drop on Sunday at 7 p.m. I am scheduling those now because it airs at 6 p.m. here in Houston, so I have it scheduled to drop immediately after airing. Just thank you. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. I love these episodes where I just go down memory lane. Until next time, take care. Be safe.